for you guys. It's your podcasts sound a lot more structured than ours.
You'd be surprised.
That's very funny.
I mean, maybe not the lock-ins are pretty fun.
The chaos is a feature.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, because you're going directly to the chaos from Reddit, which is a great premise. So thank you so much for keeping up with all the Discord chats, Dean, and fitting us into your schedule.
Oh no, thanks for being so patient with us. It's hard for us to schedule time to talk to each other, let alone anyone else. So grateful for your persistence.
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to get you guys on for a while, and the book was like the best opportunity, and we've both just finished it, and we're chatting about it before you guys joined, and we're really excited to talk with you about it. I think nice. I'll just kind of introduce the podcast, and we can just start talking, and Jason and I will have some questions going into each chapter, and I also have a longer question that Daniel emailed me.
Great.
But I'll begin by introducing the podcast and then introducing you guys. So welcome to The Regrettable Century. I'm here today with Jason, and we're joined by Dean Detloff and Matt Bernico, who are the authors of the recently published Enough is Enough, Degrowth, Capitalism, and Liberation Theology, published by Fortress Press, which is really incredible. Jason and I just finished it. And we're really excited to have them on today to talk about the journey, talk about the product, talk about all the different systems of thought that they cohere together. You might know of Dean and Matt as the co-hosts of the Magnificast, one of my favorite podcasts. I've been a listener for years and kind of a part of the Discord community. And so I've sort of been watching this come to fruition over time, hearing about it and hearing about the amazing, events like correspondence with Leonardo Boff, the great liberation theologian, and the like. So it's very exciting to re-encounter it here in the finished product. Also worth mentioning is our comrade Daniel. I got to know at a reading group with Matt reading Guy Debord several years ago, and we realized after 2 or 3 of those meetings that we lived 10 minutes away from each other. So we've become fast friends. One of my best friends now. We started a book club, and I've gotten to know he and his wife. And so the community is, reproducing itself in reality. So I guess I would like to start talking about this. Enough is Enough. What was the genesis of this? Obviously, there's nothing, I haven't encountered anything like this. Fortress Press puts out a lot of sort of sometimes left-leaning, quasi-progressive, scholastic books, but nothing as explicitly this have I encountered in my life. So where did this come about initially?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways to answer that question. The first one is that somebody asked us to pitch a book for Fortress Press, and we did it. That sucks. That's a boring story. Don't even worry about that one. The much more interesting question is, the much more interesting answer is that Dean and I have a folder in our Google Drive that's full of the book ideas that have never gone anywhere. Nonsense. There's just every few months we think, we should probably do a book or something like that. That'd be great. And then we just have just piles and piles of these ideas for books and outlines and different thoughts and how they coalesce. Maybe they come from the podcast, maybe they come from a different conversation that we've been having or something. But this one, I think, it happened. It became a reality because somebody gave us sort of the means to do it, which I think, which actually sparked something for us. I think we have lots of ideas, but we need somebody else to tell us that this can actually be done, that they would like us to write this.
Right. It's like the constraints of grad school reverberating outward.
Yeah. Shamefully, yes.
That's right. We're also just thinking a lot about capitalism and climate change on the podcast over the last several years. And when we were trying to think of, well, what would be the book worth writing, or what do we feel maybe needs to be said but isn't being said, or isn't being said enough or loud enough or whatever, we thought, well, we should really try as Christians to figure out how capitalism works and how it relates to climate change. And I think that kind of explicit link is the contribution we thought we were just in a position to make. So yeah, hopefully it's making that contribution out there.
But it's done. Oh, sorry, Jason. I just quickly, it's done in a. I mean, obviously there are other introductions to climate change, to degrowth, but obviously you're making a specific case, and it's done in a very. I have a question about audience in a moment. We'll get to, but this is done in a very gentle. To reference Lenin, patient understanding.
Yeah.
Accessible but still highly sophisticated. So it's like. And in the register of the good, the beautiful, and the true, the good, the true, and the beautiful, to reference your intro to your show. So, yeah, that's not an easy task. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just gonna say, Dean, you had said hopefully we're making a contribution, and I think you've done a really good job here. I think that the kind of person who might be compelled to read John Bellamy Foster or Michael Lovey would maybe not read Laudato Si, and maybe doesn't know very much about St. Francis and so on. And the inverse is also true. And this book, I think, is a really, really good bridge. Like I already have recommended it to 2 people since last night.
Yeah, that's great. Love to hear it. Thanks for that guerrilla marketing. So important for us. We're not doing a good job at
it. That's such a funny way to put it, though, that it's a bridge between those 2 worlds. And it's like, oh man, we got to get Christians reading John Bellamy Foster. We got to get John Bellamy Foster reading Laudato Si. Such a funny corner, bit of the market we've cornered there. Really narrow casting.
But it's funny though, that you say that, because like I agree, it is kind of bizarre, like it's a weird bridge to build, but in a weird way it's like 40 years ago it wouldn't have been bizarre at all. And in fact, right. I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of older progressive Christians and Catholics in particular in my day job, and a few of them who've read it have been emailing me being like, oh man, we used to read the monthly review all the time, and I just let my subscription lapse a few decades ago. I'm going to pick that up again. So, like, I think in some ways we're also just maybe admitting our own anachronism, but I feel like there's an important thing to note is it's like, I don't know, maybe there's some originality to it, but I really feel the biggest contribution we wanted to make is to say, like, we're actually not the first Christians to think very hard about, capitalism, and we need to kind of pay our dues, but also like pull that stuff into the present and be like, that's not lost to the 20th century.
Yeah, like there were men of the cloth in the Sandinista government, but that wasn't the first and only time that the agendas are so they overlap so well. But again, like I said, you guys have you've made our case a lot easier to make to people. But it's like now we could just say, hey, read this book.
Yeah, we were both noticing. Jason and I have been reading with our comrade Mir, who lives in Sweden. Have been reading Laudato Si together again, and like going through it line by line. It's such a rich source text that obviously influenced the both of you in this text. And back to what I alluded to, this question of audience. So Francis and his interlocutor are addressing, for lack of a better term, Christendom, but also the world writ large, everyone all at once. And you guys are kind of doing the same thing, kind of addressing why this is necessary to think through for believers, why it's something that we've been alienated from in our Christian faith for a long time, this past century anyway, and also why it's a useful tool, why it can influence people who are not believers and don't have this relationship to the Christian faith.
Yeah, I mean, I think Laudato Si is like it's a really important moment in the last 20 years in terms of like bringing faith into the public sphere. I suppose it's a popular thing. Verso came out with its own Laudato Si publication, which is fun. And I think that there's just like there is a persisting cultural relevance of Laudato Si, of of Pope Francis, of Pope Leo. Even I think I was chatting with some of my coworkers about the book, and they were nice enough to listen to me. And not people who are I don't know, religious in a big way or explicitly so, but they were like, yeah, that's interesting. Like I read Laudato Si, or I know about it, or these last two popes have been interesting to me in X, Y, and Z ways. So yeah, I just think that those are things that have a little bit of cultural weight at the moment, outside of the normal sphere. And I think if we can kind of bring more of like the economic thought to bear on those things, or at least explain some of the big economic ideas behind Laudato Si, or any of the other kind of weird Catholic bits that we bring up, I think it's good and helpful for people.
It's funny, actually. I was reading, just in reading the first chapter, like this connection between like idolatry, and especially in Isaiah, and how the carpenter makes his God. He can't really see himself as having made his own fortune and misfortune, and that reminded me very much of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Example that Marx gives for the bourgeoisie and the creation of capitalism, and how the market just wants this, whatever, as if it just wants this independent of us. So like right away, just you make that connection really, really easy, really good. I was just curious, like when you would talk a little bit about GDP and why you start there.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. One is that GDP is just in every degrowth book. So if you talk about degrowth, you're contractually obligated to say something about GDP. And this is the thing that we can say about GDP in a unique way that's saying something a little different than other people. There's that piece. But there's a reason that GDP shows up so often in degrowth literature. It is a number that is everywhere when it comes to presidential speeches, or in my case, prime ministerial speeches. It is in journalism about the economy. It's like constantly being talked about on TV or whatever. But if you ask any normal person at all, what is the GDP? They have no idea. Nobody knows what the GDP is. It's a bizarre, numerical device. And yet it is everywhere. And it is like in public discourse, like it's not buried in an economics textbook. It's like when a journalist in, the Nation is trying to tell you that Joe Biden is good, they're like, look at the GDP. Mm-hmm. So I think there's that piece of it, is to say GDP is this kind of weird force that we invented. And just like you're saying, it has kind of gone out of control, or we like forgot that we invented it. And now we don't know how to rein it back in. We're kind of, shoveling coal into the furnace of it and hoping that it keeps us going. And the train is like going to go off the cliff, whatever metaphor you want to pick. It's like, it's this kind of weird imaginary device that has profound material consequences. So I think the language of idolatry to us, it comes out of a biblical tradition, a Jewish and Christian tradition in our case, but it also has, as we say in the book, it's been used and picked up by non-Christian people, by degrowth people, but also by even Karl Marx and Erich Fromm and these kind of critical theory folks. And it's because idolatry is saying something a little bit more than just ideology or just false consciousness and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think we wanted to say, like, liberation theologians stumbled on the economic and political utility of this theological idea, and we should use it. We should think about what it opens up for us.
It's really interesting. I keep mentioning audience, and it's very exciting to like read this, which is in many ways, it's an introduction to all of these systems of thought, with a primary engagement with Christians, of course. But it's actually reintroducing Christians to things they presumed they already understood. Mm-hmm. And it's doing that in conjunction with appealing to a larger audience beyond Christians. And that's one of the ways you do that, is by kind of situating Marx as having been, very influenced by Scripture, which is a great twist.
And I think a big surprise to some people. It shouldn't be, but it is, or would be.
Yeah, that's true. It's in his background up and down. Yeah. I don't know. I guess we don't need to like rehearse it all here. You can go read a biography of Marx, but yeah, it's in the background for Marx. It's in the background for basically every writer of the 19th century and the 18th century. It's there, it's in the water. So they're going to use it. Even if they are, more or less atheists, it's still going to be there. But I think it ends up being helpful, and even people who are not religious. I think that there is kind of a utility to that language of idolatry. There's a bit where we quote Pablo Richard, who's a liberation theologian. We talk about him a lot on the podcast as well, but he is he's a great thinker when it comes to idolatry. But something that I always appreciate is that he says that idolatry is capitalism is not atheistic; it's idolatrous. And I think that even if you're not a Christian, you can kind of come to you can appreciate that type of thinking and language when you're coming to critique capitalism, recognizing that it is so much bigger than economy or ideology. It is like it is truly, it holds like a religious place in our minds, sort of centrally in how it functions. And there's a theist and atheist collaboration on sounding out those idols and smashing them together. So I mean, if you're not a person who believes in any religion of any type, that's totally fine with me. But we can do the work of smashing capitalism either way. I think that's great.
I'm trying to recall. I just finished the book, so I'm not sure exactly where I read it. But what the liberation theologian who said the first step toward reclaiming a relationship with reality and with God is atheism, is basically unlearning all of the things you've been told about God. Was that Dorothy Swallier or another?
She talks about it. I mean, that's a theme that comes up in a number of liberation theologians, actually, especially in Latin America. Enrique Dussel has a bunch of stuff about that in particular, really compelling right around exactly that kind of question that, how do we become atheistic with respect to a system that has kind of taken a totalizing role in our world? And I guess a good appendix on that, he wrote a great book called The Theological Metaphors of Marx, just to go back to the last question. It was recently translated into English, but he makes an argument that Marx is a theologian of capitalism in a really funny way, but the theology he's doing is about the Antichrist, that like capitalism is the Antichrist. So he's got to deploy all these funny theological categories to make sense of it. And, liberation theologians are always looking for that kind of move in leftists as well, or left-wing sources. Like, how do we kind of fragment the totalization of the world around us? And that is a kind of atheistic move in a certain sense, even if it's not in another sense.
Totally.
We can all deconstruct and become evangelicals from capitalism together.
It's right.
Well, it's very much it's a feature of the disenchantment of the world. Whether or not you consider yourself to be theistic or atheistic, the disenchantment of the world is part and parcel with modernity, which comes out of the Reformation, and some of the biggest champions of this way of understanding the world is they speak from a pulpit and they say, this is all for us to use. God gave us mastery over the world. And I like not just Pope Francis, not just Saint Francis, but like in your book, it's like, kind of remind us, like, actually, we are inheritors of and responsible for this creation, which is like in the same way that, like, as an older brother, you might be responsible for your baby, your siblings who are younger and need care. It's a much different way of thinking about our relation to the world, and you do a really good job of laying that out.
We're siblings.
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's, to me, I mean, like, talking through the GDP and how it all works and sort of demystifying that a bit, I think is great. And I think that we spent a lot of time figuring that out. But I think, like, we spent equally a lot of time agonizing over how to land the plane and say something that is, like, meaningful about that type of spirituality, about thinking about how it is we care for our siblings, because there's so much, like, Christian stuff written out there, some of it good, some of it bad, about ecology, about, like, creation care and, like, stewardship, and, like, it makes my eyes roll because of, I think, how not up to the task a lot of it is. But I think, like, in thinking through some of that with Leonardo Boff and just coming to coming to the conclusion that like there has to be, you know, another way of thinking about nature theologically and about intervening politically. It was a big task for us, but I think an important one that I'm glad that we did. I'm pretty happy the way that bit turned out.
Jason, what you were saying reminded me of it's a quote that comes later in the book, but they're quoting Walter Benjamin. The Christianity of the Reformation period did not favor the growth of capitalism. Instead, it transformed itself into capitalism. And that's kind of much like we talk a lot about how we inherit all of the good and bad of Marxism on this podcast, and socialism and communism. And of course, it's true for Christianity as well.
Yeah.
The oppression and the liberation.
And the fact that we have the tools to resist the oppression from the same source. It's very dialectical.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also a key piece of the approach that we have. Like, you know, we're Christians. We think Christianity is cool and interesting, and you know, can be made use. You can make use of it toward liberating ends and so on. But all these things are, as we put it in the book, kind of hazardous materials. Like, especially for example, the idolatry idea. Like, we like it. I think it gets you somewhere that other language doesn't. But it is true also that idolatry is the language by which colonizers, you know, subjugated many, many non-Christian people throughout the world, and other Christians for that matter. You know, like idolatry is the kind of thing that you can also wield to destroy other human beings. And I think it's like, yeah, it's just kind of trying to carve out a space to be like, well, can we have a nuanced conversation about how there actually is no pure discourse somewhere? You're always going to be sifting through the, you know, the big garbage dump of whatever human history has to offer, and you're just trying to find the stuff that you could like put together in a purposeful way toward a different end.
Well, it's funny because on that subject, if you want to really engage in a scholarly way with the discourse about the anti-colonial discourse, one of the most important sources for you would be Bartolomeo de las Casas, and he's very much he's a priest, and he's talking about the treatment of the indigenous people and how it's an affront to God, and we know so much about this horrible treatment of the people in the discovered New World because of the men of faith who had a job and they decided not to do it that way. So yeah, it's complicated. It's interesting.
Not to sound delusions of grandeur, but those who best, you know, speak up on behalf of the global South from the global North are sort of inheritors of that legacy. At least that's.
Wait, when you say delusions of grandeur, you mean like us?
Well, I don't want to. I'm not saying I am in the seat of Bartolomeo de las Casas. I'm just saying it's a similar relationship of power, but it's harder for people to see. You know, it's also this great magician's trick on a global scale in which we can't see our relationship to oppression. We can't see the bloody treats, right? The blood is invisibilized. I think that's why idolatry is it's an added step from ideology, because it's also referring to facts on the ground. It's not just a value chain. It's the wreckage that's continuously happening to everyone and everywhere, which ideology and sort of all of it, you know, it's premising capital on the need to grow. It's returning to growth. It's not even the ideology of capitalists. It's the necessity of growth. That's something you do very well of returning to again and again, and redefining. It's like the commodity form of your book, I guess.
Those two things are so funny. The necessity of growth and sort of thinking about that in terms of idolatry, and then also the invisible blood like connected to all of that. And I think it's like making those connections is really important to get to exactly like how powerful that idol is on the one hand, and also like how absolutely absurd it is on the other. Like, I mean, just the way that like the GDP works or how it's calculated is absurd. That, you know, me handing you $10 is growing the economy. That,
and then I give it back to you, and we grew it twice.
And yeah, well, you guys can all write Mark Carney and ask him to thank you for it. But it's like, that, I mean, that's absurd in the first place. But also, like, when you kind of, I don't know, pan out a bit and you recognize that even something like cleaning up from a climate disaster is growing the economy, that, like, the thing that our governments are after, whether it's the US or Canada or even the UK, they're always constantly trying to search for growth, and they'll just kind of baldly say it. And, what that means is absurd. It can mean literally anything. It doesn't mean that the world is getting better. It doesn't mean that, it serves a particular purpose. It just means that the line is going up on a chart somewhere, and that's it. So, I mean, I think when we break things down, we can really look at, like, what is worshiping this particular idol look like. You can start seeing exactly why capitalism is a problem in the first place, why the pursuit of growth is a problem in the first place, and, like, just it just feels like stupid. Like, why are we doing this? This makes no sense whatsoever. And then all for a handful of treats that are more or less nice, but, like, make other people's lives miserable. It just seems like, I don't know. This is not good. This is not good is how I feel.
Yeah, I was just, you made me think of you draw upon Franz Hinkelemmert. I always have trouble with his last name, but you guys have done some, studied him on the podcast for a while, so it was nice to read some of what you extract. And he has this idea of entrepreneurial metaphysics, which is really helpful for me. You framing it as, like, this imaginary reality that is literally I didn't realize how recently GDP was invented. That
I don't
adds
think
to
it did either.
But yeah, this basically creation is on one side and capital's on the other. Capital's on the side of an imagined reality that, according to its logic, as you were saying, Matt, the fires engulfing the West Coast are increasing GDP, and climate change is going to be a boon for GDP, writ large across the globe. It's a fabulous, invention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's wild is, like, it will be a boon for GDP until it's not. Like, you have all these, kind of future forecasters of the economy who are not socialists, who every year keep coming out with these reports being like, climate change is going to really tank the growth of our global economies. And if your economy is only capable of growing, that is going to create huge, huge economic problems. I mean, huge austerity, real economic depression. Like, the wild thing about it is, the GDP can only grow insofar as it can capitalize on a catastrophe, which it does do quite often. But some catastrophes are so large that you can't really make up the gap, economically speaking. And I think that's the troubling thing, is, like, even the fabulation of GDP growth being the thing that will save us, like, even the true believers are like, maybe the clock is ticking on this stuff, and still we can't really wean ourselves off of it. That's the kind of horrifying thing about it.
Yeah, I mean, there will come a time in the probably near future. Now I'm joining the ranks of fabulators and and projectors, but there will come a time in the future, not too distant future, when the cost and benefit analysis will not outweigh the risk and damages, right? That, like, at some point, like, fossil fuels will just and heating will become too big of an economic drain, and then we will see capitalism kind of having to rein itself in and invest to other places and try to find growth elsewhere. So, I mean, like, but that's not good news, I guess. I don't get it twisted. When I do say that, I don't mean that, like, capitalism will just figure this out and you don't have to worry. But what I'm saying is capitalism will figure this out. You do have to worry, because it will figure it out far too late, after it's already too hot and everyone's dead. So don't worry about it. Please worry is what I'm saying.
Yeah, please worry.
Yeah. And that sort of leaves us in that sort of unembraceable, to me, sort of end notes variant of preparing for the inevitability of collapse, which perhaps, but my God, how do you go forward as a living being in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about degrowth as a discourse, is that it is people often say, like, at some point we are going to stop being so geared toward economic growth solely. The question is whether or not it's by disaster or by design.
Right.
And I think it is naive to think that we will find some way to design our way out of the climate crisis and out of capitalism. I think that is basically a leap of faith that we take in the book, in part because Pope Francis says, if you don't take that leap, if you just consign yourself to despair, you're also consigning the lives of, many, many, many poorer people than you are to an untimely death. And that is really a luxury that we can't, afford, and a kind of like retreat from reality that we shouldn't be willing to afford. So I think there is I think probably that notes people, they're probably right. It probably is going to collapse, and that sucks. That's the pessimism of the intellect part of the equation for me. But the optimism of the will part of that, to harken back to Gramsci, is to be like, well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't actually try to do the impossible. And impossibility is something that leftists and Christians both share. That's kind of the thing you sign up for, I think, when you get involved in organizing, whether it's at a church or at a labor union meeting. And I think that is the kind of hopeful part of degrowth that I think is an earned hope rather than a naive hope, whether or not it turns out to be a founded hope or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's a lot of pessimism in it. But I think that what is cool about degrowth, and what is cool about, some of the thoughts that are adjacent to it even, are that the shift that needs to happen is one that is of politics and imagination. But it is all well within the possibility of physics. We can do it. It's totally possible. It's not like that. It's not that we're up against a problem that is technologically, we're technologically incapable of overcoming or something. It's really just about political will. It's really about ideas. It's kind of about structure. So it's I think there's actually a lot of hope. That we could change people's minds, that we could do something different. I think that's all very possible. It's not like it's not like we have to do anything that is physically impossible, just politically very difficult.
That's when we talk about being pessimists, we mean of a certain type. I'm very pessimistic about capitalism running out of steam because it never has. And maybe Elon Musk will have his way, and it won't be quite the same system as Karl Marx wrote about, but it won't be good. But the other half of that is the optimism of the will, or the faith that you have to take. That I feel very strongly about. I'm extraordinarily pessimistic about what we are doing and where it's going, but I have an almost infinite amount of hope and faith in what we can do. That leads me to a question, which is I think it's in chapter 4. Yeah, you said that degrowth is an awkward term, and that you lament it, and you talk about how maybe there's some other ways it could have been used, but nevertheless, this is the term that is used. And that makes me think about the kind of, there's a kind of socialist who says degrowth is an anti-working class. It's that's not for us. That's only bourgeois politics. And I guess I kind of wondered if you guys would just talk about that a little bit more, because I am a big fan of degrowth, but I also could be critiqued as an ascetic, even thinking monastic life would be fine if that's what it took.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something more. Like you said, Pope Francis's simplicity does not mean a life of gloomy withdrawal from the pleasures of life. So I was curious if you would elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, the term degrowth is a complicated one. It's got its ups and downs. I think that the way that people caricature it is that it is it's a movement of austerity, that we can't have nice things, that working class people will actually just have to accept living more austere lives, even though they already live quite austere lives within the confines of capitalism in the global north. Like, these are all critiques that I think people make of degrowth. And those are wrong. Those are wrong. If you've ever read even one book about degrowth, which is always my challenge to people who are trying to say those things, if you even read one book about degrowth, those particular ideas are always dealt with. People are, the apologetics of degrowth are alive and well, and I think that critics should actually take some time to crack open a book and do some reading. Anyways, all of that being said, it is like a complicated term because it does, it's not all just about degrowing the economy. It's not just about making the GDP line go down. It's really kind of an agnosticism towards growth in a lot of ways. Do I care if the line goes up or down? Well, no, I care about how much carbon is in the atmosphere and how, energy intense, things are. If we had an economic system that maybe didn't utilize carbons as much, like, maybe it would be fine. But even aside from that, growing the economy in ways that would actually benefit people's lives would also be good. Like, right. Like, what if we had to grow, in the United States, what if you grew the economy by a huge and expansive universal healthcare system that had social care and mental health care all kind of rolled into it? That could grow the economy in a big way. I don't really know the economics of that, but let's say that it could. That would be fine. And that would actually still be, I think, within the confines of degrowth. In the global south, even, I think degrowth has a lot of interesting critiques that come up in our book. Even when we talked to Leonardo Boff and we asked him about degrowth, he said it's fine. It's good for the global north because they've grown enough, right? But for the global south, there's more growth needed there, and that makes complete sense. There's a sense in which degrowth is not like a panacea. The line going down is not good for everybody. It's that we need to have sort of a democratically planned economy where we can balance out the well-being of people's populations with the well-being of the planet. So degrowth is the word that people use to kind of mean that thing, but it's got its complications.
Yeah, I think too, if you kind of just, the way we boil it down a few times in the book is to sort of two different things that are part of degrowth. One is removing growth from its pedestal as the organizer of society, the goal of society. So as Matt said, it's a kind of agnosticism toward growth. Let's stop justifying every choice we make based on whether or not it achieves economic growth. That's an arbitrary goal. The second one, though, is the intentional reduction of consumption and production in a way that is planned democratically for the sake of, creaturely well-being. And I think the critics of degrowth, they seize on a term that we admit is not a great term. If I was in the meeting, I would have put my hand up and say, I don't think we should do this one, but I wasn't there and they did it. So we're stuck with it. But that being said, people are capable of they're capable of literacy if they want to exercise it. We, especially on the left, people get mad about socialism. They get mad about the term communism. They get mad about all these terms. And yet we still think that there's a reason to, take the time to explain what we mean by them and hope that somebody gets it. I think when it comes to degrowth, if you boil it down to those two pieces and you then put that back toward critics of degrowth, a good faith critic is probably a degrowther, even though they are mad about that term. It's like to not be if you were to invert those 2 points, you'd be like, okay, so you think that growth arbitrarily is a good goal for society? No left-wing person would say that. Right. That makes no sense at all. And secondly, you think that we should just not plan our economies and increase our consumption and production? That's also something no left-wing person would agree with. So I think, it's true that degrowth is doing something a little bit different than your standard socialist discourse. It's kind of putting its finger on the process of capital accumulation in an explicit way, and in ways that sometimes do actually lose the working class side of it. Degrowth is not a univocal conversation. There are liberals in it. There are anarchists in it. There are Marxists in it. You can have your political discussions within that discourse. So I think it's fair to grant that point for sure. But at the same time, to me, that's an invitation to intervene in that conversation, not to caricature it and be like, well, I'm doing real socialism and they're doing, whatever, bourgeois politics. To me, that's just an admission that like you just don't want to read, and that's too bad.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Well, one of the counterpoints that I'm very sensitive to messaging, and I would admit to having, misgivings about, as much as I support defund the police, for example, enthusiastically support, I can see how that's perhaps not the best vehicle for certain kinds of, let's say, reformist reforms to be enacted. As a non-reformist reform, perhaps there's an argument, which you guys get to elsewhere in the book. But I think the thing that I did appreciate was that this term degrowth, it's not recuperable. It's not co-optable by the oligarchic corporatism that rules the world, because in the very name it's striking a blow at the premise of capital accumulation. So that's, I think, a merit in its favor. As far as having a kind of populist rhetorical appeal, there's so much education that has to be done whenever you introduce it. That's why you wrote the book, in part, right? But then, like, I think it's an easy response to say what you both said. Like, we're talking about degrowth of capital, degrowth of profits, not degrowth of well-being, not degrowth of healthcare, or a healthcare that's accessible to all, or like a different kind of food system. Like the term growth can be reoriented in a new direction. That's not just kind of an extractivist system. That
doesn't have to be you don't always have to have the boo-boos in the claw machine. You can degrow the Pacific garbage patch, actually. Mm-hmm. We need a much smaller one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for all of the critiques and like nuance that I think are important in the conversation around degrowth, I do think, like you're saying, it is unrecuperable. Like, there are other people within this conversation on degrowth, and like absolutely no shame to them. I'm not casting aspersions or trying to start an inter-degrowth beef. But like, some people prefer the term a well-being society rather than a growth society, right? And fine, like that's cool. I know some folks that are involved in that, and like, more power to them. I will support them in every way I possibly can, because I think we're still doing the same thing. But also, like, you see that is a term that is co-optable. Like, people can co-opt that, and they have. Like, I don't know. This is just a stupid anecdote, but like on LinkedIn, I found somebody who is like a well-being sort of like business consultant. It's like, this is dumb. This is not helpful. This is not, I mean, like, whatever that project is, it's like, it is fundamentally different than the one that we are working on. And like, the difference is degrowth, and theirs is, well, I found a way to make the idea of well-being work for people who own small businesses. And it's like, I just don't have any interest in that. That does not make sense to me. The critique that we're making is fundamentally different.
But he's contributing to the growth of GDP, Matt.
That's and like, that's true. Yeah. And I think that's bad.
Yeah, I think too, the funny thing about a lot of criticisms of degrowth is that they actually boil down to criticisms of effects of a growth society, which we talk about a little bit in the book. For example, austerity, neoliberalism, these are growth strategies. They're painful, bad growth strategies, but that is why they do it. Like, neoliberalism says, we can't invest in the public sector. We can't expand your public transportation or the healthcare system or whatever, because we've got to tighten our belts for the good of the economy, the big growing economy that gets bigger every day. That's the idea. Same with, like depressions and recessions. These are the products of growth economies. They have a boom and bust cycle. They're booming in some sectors, they bust in others, whatever. There's going to be an AI bust pretty soon. There was a housing bust in 2008. Like, these are features of growth strategies. And in the most egregious criticisms, people will say, like, Donald Trump, our first degrowth president, because every once in a while, whatever, he like blocks the Strait of Hormuz, and then the oil sales are down or whatever. And it's like, this is still a growth strategy, as harebrained and counterintuitive as it may be. at the end of the day, Donald Trump is trying to grow the US American economy over and above all other economies. And that's why he's doing it. So
and also he's successful at doing it. It's just because because the Strait of Hormuz is closed, or because like oil takes a downturn in like X, Y, and Z ways, or from this time, like the United States is like the middleman for oil for the entire world. That's right. That's it. And it's like Donald Trump is not the degrowth president. He is a very successful capitalist president. Please stop.
Whatever elements of degrowth there might ever be, those are incidental and they're accidental. That's definitely not his plan at all.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like you said earlier too, like degrowth is actually about the expansion of goods and opportunities for all of us rather than for some of us, like degrowth. Something we've been saying a lot in interviews is like, we have certain degrowth institutions. They're called local libraries, for instance. This is a publicly funded institution that expands our access to information, to knowledge, to tools that we wouldn't otherwise have, to skills, etc., to community, all these things that we wouldn't have if we didn't have a publicly owned space of, knowledge sharing and other things. And I think the degrowth kind of pitch is to be like, if we didn't make capital growth the key, then maybe we would discover all kinds of other sectors of society that we could grow, even if that meant, deprivatizing this or that thing, or anyway. So I think like degrowth is about expanding all kinds of stuff. It's just not about capital accumulation in particular.
Right.
That makes me want to ask, or to get into a little bit this notion of recovering the Bible's suspicion toward growth. Because I think that for a lot of people, certainly listeners of ours, they might like and tolerate our mine and Ben's Christianity. But I think a lot of times this is an audience which does not necessarily have the experience of regular, maybe they weren't raised in a church of some kind.
I think it's seen as like a form of attachment, is how it's understood from outside. Why else would you have this attachment?
Yeah. So I think that this biblical degrowth part of chapter 5, that's something I think that deserves a little bit of unpacking for the benefit of the audience.
Before doing that, I found the passage I was thinking of in the idolatry chapter. It's by Victorio Araya, Costa Rican theologian, and he said, in order to believe in God, we must first disbelieve in the gods we have contrived. We must begin by being atheists. And so there's a register in which it's talking to us here about our relationship to Scripture, Christianity, the Bible, etc. The good news is something I talk about with Daniel and his wife, Caitlin, about the alienation of what the good news even means, and the sort of evangelical manipulation of turning it into this wholly inwardly facing liberation instead of being outwardly facing to the community and the world. And I think there's also a register in which he's talking to, everyone who's basically their entire premise of well-being is upon growth, this thing that they never encounter, most of us never encounter in our personal lives. Anyway, I just wanted to offer that as a way into this exegesis you do.
Yeah, thanks. The biblical degrowth stuff that we do parse out in this book, I think is really cool. And it's cool, but it's also very complicated at the same time. And I think maybe I'll say why it's complicated, then I'll let Dean kind of talk about some of it as well. But it's complicated because, the economics that you would find in the Bible are pretty different than the economics you would find today, not just in terms of like values and social norms, but it's a pre-capitalist economy. It's very different. Just in the mechanics and how it works, all of that different. But I think what is interesting in the Bible about, in what the Bible tells us about economics in different places here and there, is that it does tell us a perspective, or it gives us a particular set of values to kind of like look through to think about economics, and those values are often from the bottom up. They're looking up from the bottom, towards a view of economics that are coming from people who are poor. Whether that is like thinking through the year of Jubilee in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, or if it's thinking about like, any of Jesus's wacky and wild parables in the New Testament. They're all written from the perspective of people who are, peasants. They're people who are workers. They're people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder. And I think that is what gives them their subversive quality, is that they're written from that particular perspective. So, and that's why they oftentimes feel so anti-capitalist when you read them, is because they're written with that audience in mind. So, I guess it's important to kind of put that bit out there, is that these all have particular references and kind of contexts, and they are the poor. That's who these things are written for. So I think that's why they work particularly well for degrowth, and why they work for anti-capitalists as well.
Yeah, I think building that bridge to our own moment in time, like maybe it is an attachment, and that's fine with me. I don't care. Like if other people don't want to be attached to Christianity, I don't blame them.
Oh yeah,
whatever.
Big time.
I'm condemned to be attached to it, so that is what I'm going to talk about. But also, so are a lot of other people in the world. And I think that it matters to try to figure out what are the kind of arguments from within those traditions that are persuasive to people for whom those values really do matter, whether it's by virtue of attachment or like sincere commitment or, whatever.
It's like 2 billion people, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's worth talking about.
Increasingly more in the Global South specifically. Yeah. I mean, Christianity is a Global South religion. If you are a Christian person in the Global North, you are in the geographical minority of this faith tradition right now.
Absolutely.
And I think that is really important. Like, what are people in the Global South saying about their own faith tradition, about how they're reading these texts in particular that are so significant, that have shaped the world in good and bad ways? And something we talk a lot about on the podcast is Christianity is ambiguous. It will always be ambiguous. And what that means is if you think it should be good and liberating, then you've got to do the work to push it in that direction if you can hang. Some people can't hang, and that's fine. Like, again, that's okay with me. I'm not here to convert anybody. As a Catholic, I'm not allowed to do that, proselytization and so on. But I think there is a really compelling story about wealth and poverty. And there are many, many points in the Bible where you can see all across like centuries in different contexts, people are pointing out that the seeds that become the kind of important foundation of capitalist accumulation that are starting to emerge in pre-capitalist societies, the Bible is constantly being like, we got to lop that off. We have to prune that really quickly or it's going to get out of control. And it does. That's exactly what happened, is that the Christian tradition itself buried its own, gardening shears or whatever. They were like, we don't care about that Jubilee stuff anymore. So I think something we really liked about liberation theology in this book is that it allows you to rediscover that message that Matt was just talking about, the kind of, what is the economic analysis of the poor in an oppressive society? And liberation theologians in the South are the ones who are trying to also then ask, okay, what would it mean to repeat that in a different capitalist economy? How would our analysis deepen and change, but informed by, what was said 2 millennia ago, more than that? So I think that's, a fun exercise, whether you're a Christian or not, is to be like, did you know there were a bunch of people who, they already had their ears attuned to the violence of capitalist accumulation. And we should attune our ears with all the tools that we can in the 21st century.
One of the really exciting parts of that chapter, which is towards the end of the book, we're talking about Christian tools for conviviality, I think, is when you go following William R. Herzog, go into the parable of the talents, and basically do a reading of it. Once you've encountered this reading of it, all the ones you were brought up with, it's like the GDP. It's like this imaginary reality. It's like, how could that ever have been construed to be true? And yet it basically shaped all of us here, I'm presuming, for our, in our childhoods. And could you just briefly go into that for us and explain the moves you're doing with Herzog?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you said, we are probably all shaped by the parable of the talents in one way or another, for better and for worse. The usual reading of the story is this is in this story. In case you're unfamiliar with it completely, there's sort of a rich guy who has these servants. He gives each of his servants a bit of money, the talents, and he says, go off and do what you're going to do with these things. Within the story, each of the servants takes that talent, the money, and in one way or another multiplies it. We don't know exactly the way that's done, but we'll get to how it is done in a minute. And the first one, he brings back more money. He's multiplied the talents. He's multiplied the money. The second one does the same. The third one, he is in trouble though, because he did not multiply the talents. He buried them in the ground, and he is like immediately on his back foot, begging forgiveness from the rich guy who gave him the money, his master. And there's this kind of interesting thing. Well, hang on, I'm not gonna get too far ahead of myself. In the usual reading of the story, God is identified with the master. We're all the servants. And we don't want to be like the guy who didn't multiply the money. We don't want to be like the guy who just buried the money in the ground. Because the usual way we read this story is that it's about God giving us gifts and us doing something with those gifts to sort of amplify them in the world, or to like grow our gifts, grow the kingdom of God, however you want to frame it. It's about being good stewards of what God gives us. But there's this interesting bit in the Bible that was like impossible to overlook, but we do overlook it all the time, where the servant who has not done anything with his gifts, who's just buried it in the ground, says, you're a shrewd and like mean master. Basically, you often you take what's not yours. You reap what you haven't sown, and that we overlook this line completely. But when we read William Herzog's sort of recontextualization of the story and kind of like exegesis of the story, he tells us like, well, this is not actually a story about, God as the master and us as the servants. It's actually a story about like a very complicated way in which this one servant is like resisting the political economy of the day, because to the way that you would sort of like invest money and grow it is through the exploitation of others, to charge somebody rent on land, to do all kinds of nefarious things that people do even today within capitalism. So it's interesting because, we've all grown up hearing it one way, but when we really like actually look at the text and you kind of think about the historical situation, it can't be that. It can't be what we've been told. So this one little bit of the story, I think, gives us pause to reconsider the whole thing. Anyways, Dean, do you want to talk about maybe the way that we repurpose that story for our degrowth purposes?
Yeah, I mean, like, the point of the story, if you're a conservative Christian, is to say, like, and this is how capitalism works, and that's why we should all be capitalists, that God is blessing the speculative means by which you grow your wealth. But even if you're a liberal or progressive Christian, the point of the story is to kind of tame it a little bit and be like, well, God gives us these gifts that we have to go out and do something with, and you wouldn't want to hide that under a rock or whatever. And for us, we want to say, well, what's the point of Jesus telling this story in the first place? And the interesting reading that Herzog has is that Jesus is actually a popular organizer, that he's out there telling stories because he's talking to an illiterate populace, and he's trying to get them to think about the mechanisms of oppression that they're wrapped up in. So he doesn't have to explain to them who the bad guys are, because to these hearers of the parable, like, they know who the bad guy is. It's the rich guy who is kicking you off your land. And the real kind of message of the story is that when that last servant is finally critiqued by the rich guy, he is cast out into the outer darkness, it says, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, which many people use as, like, they say, well, that must be a metaphysical kind of place. It must be hell. So this person is consigned to hell. In fact, Herzog says this is the outer darkness of poverty. It is where people are weeping and gnashing their teeth out of hunger and want. And the challenge to the hearers of Jesus is to say, could you accept a class traitor into the movement that I'm organizing? Could you bring somebody whose job was to exploit you, who made the difficult choice to stop doing that, to get out of the circulation of violence? could you bring that person into this kind of alternate community that we're building together? And that is like a very cool kind of metaphor or a cool point that an organizer is making to an organized group of people. So that's what we say about degrowth as well, that like, Jesus's question to degrowth is like, what can we do to kind of reread these parables and rediscover Jesus as an organizer as we build that organized movement?
He's kind of the third servant's like the original Bartleby.
That's right.
I'm suddenly thinking about. So Matt's audio is okay, Jason?
Oh yeah, it's okay. I'm going to use this interruption though, just to really briefly say, anybody who interprets this parable saying, "Oh, this is because Jesus wants to proof of the prosperity gospel because he's given us a gift," or whatever. My only rejoinder to that would be to say, yeah, but then read the whole book of Acts.
See what happens next.
Yeah. Also, like, when are rich people ever the good guys in Jesus' story? Never. Right. Yeah. Also, when have you ever heard someone say to God, like, "You're a shrewd master, reaping where you didn't sow"?
Yeah.
I don't think so. That's not how we talk about God, actually. No. And the master does not rebuke that. He's like, "Yeah, man, what are you going to do about it? You're out of here." So, like, not the picture of God that I think most of us would actually want.
Well, it's like the peekaboo of the Old Testament God. He's like, "I'm still here." I'm that jealous God, ready to do some genocides. I was just thinking about, like, so there's the liberation theology move of basically aligning Jesus' crucifixion with the predicament of the poor. But you could also follow this sort of Christian heresy, I would say, and say that there's a damnation that is foisted upon the poor. And the sacrifice that this Bartleby servant makes places him alongside them. And this is obviously the example that we are. I mean, it's a very hallowed, not necessarily enticing example for us to follow. It's the example that Saint Oscar Romero followed, who was by no means began his career in the church as a liberation theologian. So yeah, I suppose one other thing I was thinking about, Dean, is so whether it's attachment or conviction and faith, there's a kind of populist register in which God language finds a way into messaging that your book is extrapolating, of course, not just lazily, exercising, but thinking back to, like, oh, is degrowth a good sort of vehicle or conduit? I feel like with regard to the global millions who are attached or part of the faithful, this is an avenue this is a new lane that degrowth can sort of accelerate upon.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, as we say in the book too, quoting Tisabella Surya, this really amazing Sri Lankan priest and liberation theologian, the kind of attachment of capitalism to Christianity is what has become a liability for Christianity all around the world. And Balasuri is like, we've got to do reverse evangelization here. Like, we got to send some missionaries up to the global north. They got to hear the real gospel up there. I don't know what's going on. I think there's some truth to that, though, right? Like, the further away you get from the poor themselves, or the further away you get from oppression in a proximal way, the further you are also from where the gospel makes sense. And I think that's the key. I mean, we quote even in the reading of that parable, it's hard for those of us who grow up in a capitalist society who are taught the parable, the talents, in such a way that it reinforces capitalism. It's hard for us to hear that in the way it's supposed to be said. But as we note, for Nicaraguan peasants, there's a beautiful book called The Gospel in Solentiname, which records all these Nicaraguan peasants kind of reading the Bible together in a revolutionary place. these peasants have no problem understanding the message of that parable. And in fact, they're like, oh yeah, we know what's going on here. Like, they don't need any special instruction. And the priest, Ernesto Cardenal, one of our heroes who we are usually on the side of, he even tries to like push back, and he's like, no, like, you've got it all wrong. He's kind of trying to like get them back to the usual parable of the talents interpretation. And they're not buying it. They're like, no, we know what this is all about. Like, we have our land dispossessed too. And so I think like, that's the important thing about re-encountering the text, is that it makes sense if you're a poor person. It makes sense if you're in a position of oppression. It makes less sense, or it's harder to really get the farther away from that you are.
Yeah, within. Oh, sorry, Ben, I can't hear you anymore.
Yeah, you're muted there. No.
It's good because I just butchered the quote that I was saying. It's harder. I was just saying it's harder for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle, right?
Yeah.
They literally cannot see it because they're not in contact with reality. They're so subsumed in the simulacrum of this invention.
I mean, they and we, right? Like we are subsumed ourselves. I think like that's been the joy of doing the Magnificast, is like just taking the time to read all this stuff from the global south and being like, wow, I never would have thought of Christianity like that. Now I have a completely new perspective on my place in it and my place in the world and so on. And I think that's the other challenge of degrowth, is like, if we allow ourselves to be challenged by the real global inequalities of our economy, like, we're going to have to do a lot of unlearning that we don't even know we have to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, another fun one from the Gospel in Soltaname is that there's a section where they read the Magnificat, and the Song of Mary, the poor being lifted up, the rich being sent away empty, the mighty being torn from their thrones. And one of the peasants in Nicaragua is like, yes, Mary, a communist, just like me. I get this. but meanwhile, we're like up here in the global north, we are like inventing new ways to rethink, like, well, yes, but you see, the eye of a needle is a gate in Jerusalem that the camel wouldn't go through. It's just like, we
I've heard that. I've literally heard that in the pulpit.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a lie. It's just not true. It's something that somebody made up, and that's what we get. I don't know, because we don't understand poverty. We don't understand class struggle. We like resist it. We push it off. It's uncomfortable for those of us in the global north, for I guess a lot of different reasons. But I mean, and we don't even have to stay like in Nicaragua for those kinds of readings. There are histories and instances where people are reading the Bible with the poor. People are reading the Bible with, other types of movements of people, with trade unionists, with unhoused people. And like the same thing happens, right? Like that perspective is important for coming to the text, understanding that, it's a text that's being written from the perspective of peasants, of people who are already in poverty or who are struggling in economic oppression. And that when we steamroll that stuff and we bring in, our own dumb bullshit, like we miss it. We miss the important stuff.
Well, I mean, that's a proper definition of it being the living word, right? Because it's imbued and endowed with life via this rereading of it. It's not living like inside of itself, kind of like the evangelical salvation. Mm-hmm. This is this contained phenomenon. So I was having what we were just talking about with regard to being unable to, not having the ability to encounter reality, but because of our wholly being subsumed in this alienation. I'm thinking about my grandfather, who was a pretty conservative, very conservative evangelist in El Salvador during the Civil War, during the roughest periods for many decades. But he loved going down there. He would say that the people were more in touch with that reality. They were more receptive to the gospel. Most of them being Catholics, it doesn't really surprise you when you think about it. But they seemed more authentic to him. He who grew up in pretty dire poverty himself in rural Oklahoma. So I think even from the other side of things, in ministries, for example, there's this recognition of this alienation. You literally have to escape the country, escape the global north in order to encounter reality. And I was also thinking about how Daniel and I often talk about like the limitations of plain reading of scripture, but then these are just like profound instances, the Gospel in Solentiname, where it's just profoundly what is needed, or the abolitionists in history. Like there are these select parts, especially of the Gospels, that lend themselves to plain reading. The work is done in overlaying it with all kinds of manipulations and reinterpretations that hide its meaning, which is not the case for lots of the Bible, right? You can't, when you get into dangerous territory, when you, for instance, those clobber passages, when you do a plain reading, it's very dangerous. But there's something that came to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, something that's so interesting about Herzog in particular as a biblical scholar, just to really highlight him, like his reading is anything but plain. I mean, he reconstructs an extremely complex understanding of the political economy of first century Rome, such that he can really make what seems like a plain reading of the parable of the talents kind of make a lot more sense. For example, he's like, okay, if you're a regular person in first century Rome hearing Jesus say this, you know that these are the bad guys. If you are a person in our context in a capital society hearing it, you might not default to that. And Jesus has no reason to explain that to you because he's not talking to you. So Herzog is like, well, if we want to hear what that is, then we have to actually understand the particular mechanisms of oppression. And he does that in Parables of Subversive Speech in an interesting way. But he also criticizes other kind of liberal historical analyses of the Bible, where he'll say, you can get a good liberal Protestant to like reconstruct this situation, and they're trying to get you away from like the dogmatic understanding of scripture in order to get to like the modernist historical reality of it. But he said they're so afraid of like thinking about these big concepts like justice or liberation or whatever, that they also kind of miss the historical forest for the trees. They're looking for like this little piece of whatever, and then they construct Jesus as like a quietist or like a sage or a philosopher or something like that. And it's only Herzog who's like, Herzog and others, like there are other biblical scholars who do this too, Richard Horsley, Norman Gottwald, a bunch of other people. But they, what they say is like, if we come to the text with a historical interest, but also an understanding that this is a book about liberation and it has something to say about liberation in our own time, then it actually opens up the text in a way that other liberal Protestants kind of fail to appreciate. So, I think there is like a place for, again, like a dialectical reading of, there's the plain text and there's a more complicated reading of the text. But these two things also inform each other based on whether or not we're coming to the text to get liberated or not, basically.
Right. Or whether or not you're coming in good faith for any reason.
Yeah. It made me think, just off the top of my head on what you just said, Dean, and what you said earlier, Matt, about sort of the degrowth literature or the Christian literature, basically. Ironically, your book is classified under Christian living, which I found. I mean, it's true.
That's exactly where it belongs.
It's where it belongs. Yeah, but again, that's like refreshing what that means, like you're doing with so many terms in the book, and a lot of the sort of quote unquote progressive Christian, modern, liberal, well-meaning treatments of Christian living. They kind of misuse. They're lacking in a materialist analysis, of course, but they also misuse what they already have in a way that's obfuscating. Whereas I feel like there's a corrective in your book, which is providing the materialist context and analysis.
Yeah.
But it's also not dispensing with what's already available in Christianity.
Well, and you spell that out pretty explicitly, don't you? When you say you're not like advocating like trading political economic analysis for biblical language, but rather that this is a way of helping flesh it out. And I think blurring this distinction between what I think a lot of us think of when we think of materialist over here versus idealist over there. And there's like these two separate worlds and that never the two shall meet. I think that's a mistake. But I think that you spell out exactly why you don't advocate that either.
Yeah, I mean, we're Christians, so we're also writing a Christian book, but it's also like, liberation theologians themselves were looking at other spiritual traditions. So you have people like Sebastian Kapin, this Indian Jesuit who wrote quite a lot about particular traditions in Hinduism that he thought were kind of moving in a similar trajectory. Like they also had a liberating kind of language within their spirituality. Or you have Ernesto Cardenal, who was very interested in Islam and radical Islam, but like in a progressive way, a left-wing way. And I think that like the mistake would be, we would never want to give the impression that like once you just read the Bible the right way, then you know how to do politics. That is a move a lot of Christians make that I find extremely annoying and frustrating. But I think there's a sense, we can also say like, well, once you read the Bible in this other way, it can really deepen the way that you kind of comport yourself toward the struggle, especially if that's a language that already matters to you.
Right.
I think that's right. I mean, I think I don't know, this is probably not a controversial opinion. I think that Christianity in the global north is like pretty impoverished. And by that, I mean, just the way that normal people approach it, they don't think about the questions of justice because like they're the leaders of their congregations, their priests, their pastors, their reverends are not leading them to these discussions. I was telling Dean this the other night that my wife is following this person on TikTok or whatever who's like a book talker, and she had this kind of like long drawn out post about how the Lord just put it on her heart not to read as much fiction in her life and to spend more time reading the Bible. And it's just like, what for? Like what is happening here? why is the Lord told you something so weird? The Lord's told me to smash capitalism. We are not the same type of person. But it's just like I don't know. I think that Christian living could do with a lot sort of deeper engagement with questions about justice and economics and politics, and that is why we have this book, so that the Lord can lay it on people's hearts to read it, to read more of this book in particular.
Well, yeah. Do either of you are you like fans of the band Bad Religion, or have you heard of them?
I've heard of them. I've heard songs by them. Yeah,
of course.
There's the song "American Jesus," which resonates with me very much because that's the version of Christ I was raised with, in a very Assemblies of God kind of non-denominational evangelical community in my past. And that song, when I was a teenager, was like, this is exactly right. This is why I don't like whatever. Why I'm not religious. Of course, I went through a whole long. I probably don't want to get into it here, but I eventually found my way back to the faith. Rather, I found my way to the faith again, sublated through my atheism.
You became an atheist. You were an atheist for a long time.
Oh yeah, I was. But this personalist, like my Jesus, my relationship with Jesus, got nothing else to do with anybody else, and doesn't affect the way that I might exist in relation to anybody else. I think that's very impoverished, and that version of spirituality is. I think it should go away. It should die.
One final thought before I read to you Daniel's long question. I'm sorry.
Very long question.
I was just thinking about how this. You mentioned, how Christianity is now a religion of the global South, and one of the major, the Christianity that we are all encouraging people to encounter here today is, largely being led by Catholic groups, people in high church groups, the things that are traditionally more progressive, Episcopalians and so forth. And of course, there are like strange offshoot Baptists that also fit into that. The major growth sectors of Christianity in the global South are firmly evangelical, Pentecostal, the ones that are mandated to go out and evangelize. I'm just thinking about that in terms of like what we were talking about having a shared vocabulary, having a vehicle of messaging. Is that something you guys have thought about when writing this? I mean, certainly if you have problems with the Pope, you might not keep reading this book. But that's just something that comes to mind as we talk about this. Just like you mentioned, an evangelical liberation theologian once.
Stan.
Yeah, it's like, but it's like you can think of the one, right? More or less.
There are more.
Yeah. So like that's something we should all be thinking about as well. I don't know where your guys' heads are on with regard to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about global Christianity a lot because it's part of my professional job. But like, it's true. I mean, Pentecostalism is one of the most rapidly growing Christian sectors all over the world, South and North. At the same time, I mean, Catholicism is growing faster in Africa than any other place in the world. What kind of Catholicism remains to be seen. We'll see. Is it a liberation theology kind of Catholicism? I don't know, not exactly. But the bishops in Africa have been extremely vocal about, for example, conflict minerals, the just transition. They do not like U.S. imperialism. This is like the leadership of the church saying that stuff in a place that has almost 300 million Catholics, as far as I remember, and growing. And so I think there is some competition within Christianity, among Christianity. And is the liberating version of it the one that's going to win? Like, probably not. But I also think the gospel kind of contains its own instability. And anybody who has ever spent formative time in an evangelical tradition and kind of accidentally found themselves out of it some way or other can tell you that sometimes the contradictions just get too big and too heavy. And that will happen to people in Brazil, and it will happen to people in whatever, Cameroon, that will happen whether you plan it to happen or not, because the Bible is full of contradictions. It is not a capitalist text. It doesn't in an uncomplicated way promote the prosperity gospel and all that kind of stuff. So I think there are so many things you can say about sociological analyses and, even liberation theologians' own reflections on kind of what happened with their own traditions, et cetera. We could do a whole hour-long conversation about that. But I think the hope of a book like ours is to say, if you're a person for whom, again, that tradition makes sense to you in any kind of way, whether you're a Catholic in my case or not a Catholic in Matt's case, there are resources there. There are readings of the Bible there that can kind of trouble the basic contradictions that we are all living through. And, at the end of the day, even a prosperity gospel Christian living in an oppressed part of the world often will have some kind of understanding that rich people are not looking out for me, or climate change is, destroying my farmlands and somebody's got to do something about that. I think evangelicalism now also is going to be different than it was 100 years ago. The state of capitalism is different, all that kind of stuff. So a long winding way to just say, I think Christianity is weird. It will always be weird. And there's nothing anybody can do to make it not weird. And that's a sign of hope for me.
Yeah. Amazing.
Matt, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think about world Christianity as much as you do, Dean. I think about video games, and I guess that's mostly it. But I think it is interesting, though. I mean, especially I live in the UK, in Scotland, where Christianity is no one's a Christian. No one's a Christian here. It is a cultural aspect of our society, and that is kind of about it. That being the case, though, I think there are still a lot of very smart Christian leaders here who are rethinking the role of the church within society. And maybe it just looks different in a post-Christian world. Maybe our churches have different spaces in our communities. Maybe we just have to act differently and think about what we're doing differently. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it will look one way in Africa. It will look a whole different way in the global north. Mm-hmm. And, whatever, maybe mainland Protestantism is going away. Maybe it will reincarnate itself in a different way. It's just it's hard to say how social movements, especially ones that are religious, work or don't work. They kind of creep up behind you when you're least expecting it. And sometimes they're just there, or they change forms or whatever. So I don't know. Sorry, I don't have anything beyond maybe it'll be different, but totally. I think it might be.
I think we're reaching, just to put a cap on that, an interesting, potential combustion with the various kinds of populism that the left and right have been hosts to, and that political factions have been kind of commandeering and setting against each other. It will be very messy, of course, but it seems to be enacting itself on the world stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Even if you look at, for example, look at J.D. Vance and Catholicism. I think people have an understanding that J.D. Vance is doing Catholicism badly, and the Pope is out there and he's doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
And the Pope also says he is.
Yeah. And like even non-Catholics are like, get real, J.D. Vance. We know that you're not really a Catholic up there. You're just doing whatever bullshit you're doing up there. And, like that is a kind of attitude that wouldn't have been present in the U.S. among even Catholic conservatives like 30 years ago, right? Like it would be all polite and I don't know, like people would point to someone like J.D. Vance and be like, and that's why I'm not a Catholic. And nowadays people point to him and they're like, you're actually the one here who's not the Catholic. Like I'm intelligent enough to be like, the Pope disagrees with you. So I think you're right that there is a kind of like fragmenting even of a lot of previous assumptions or associations.
Thanks for bearing
with me.
Well,
I think we have to have a degree of, let's call it faith, that the Holy Spirit will move people in ways which we maybe don't see, and we might make the wrong arguments, we might not be heard, doesn't matter. People are going to find their way because we have to exist. Especially people in the global south, they have to continue to exist regardless of what they want to think is best for them. Eventually that will come up against the realities of their experiences, their lives, and also their beliefs. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, just to put a fine point on this too, we mentioned one Stam, the one guy that we talked about, but there are many radical evangelicals in the global south. We've talked about this on the show too, like in Venezuela, for example, like there are whole evangelicals who are diehard Chavistas, and they are like, biblical literalists who also think that Hugo Chavez was doing the right thing. Like that is like an expression of evangelicalism that's basically incomprehensible in the North, but it exists down there. Or, like Lula, when he was running in a very tight election against the Bolsonarists, like he was courting evangelicals too. Right. And there were evangelicals who were like, yeah, we're here for the Workers' Party, So I think it's just to say, like, I think evangelicals in the global North, they're cooked. I'm sorry. You guys are toast. But like down there in the South, like, things just, they transplant differently. It's a different soil. It's a different context. Like, will they repeat some of the errors that are made in the North? Obviously, like everybody repeats errors. But I also think it's important to be like, well, we don't know what the global South will do with whatever comes in there, and vice versa. We don't know what they're going to do to us with like all the interesting things that they're doing. And it's important to like be attuned to that, to be like, there's a lot of creative fomentation there, and you shouldn't really like, nothing is beyond the weird, that's the important thing.
They're going to evangelize us.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you for, that was just something I've been thinking about. Now we're going to finish our conversation with Daniel. Okay. I'm going to read to you this entire question. You guys can just freestyle it after. Okay. Hey, Matt and Dean, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but I followed some of the interviews you've done and everything sounds excellent. I have a question for you related to my recent obsession with rocks, geology, mass extinctions, and deep time. Yes, light stuff, I know. Check out Peter Brandon's The Ends of the World for a good and sobering read. One thing that has really stuck with me from the science has to do with the breakneck pace of human-induced capitalist climate change, as opposed to the slow natural pace of Earth's systems over its 4.5 billion years of history. While it is true that there have been worse climate events in Earth's history, and that human-induced change seems to be far off from a level that would cause a truly apocalyptic mass extinction, something conservatives love to remind you about, the more important point is that we are putting as much CO2 into the atmosphere in a few lifetimes as what usually takes volcanoes about 500,000 years to match. In other words, it's the unprecedented pace of change that is potentially more disastrous and more unknown about our current time than anything that has come before. I suppose all this has me thinking about the connection you have both made before between capitalism and speed, velocity, and acceleration, a la Pavarilio, and what Degrowth might have to say, not just about scaling back consumerism and imperial extraction, but about a framework of de-haste, or even anti-accelerationism, one that puts the brakes on rapid growth, not just for us, but for future life. Climate change often gets framed as a doom and gloom, pessimistic rhetoric that kills people's will to change anything. But what seems very clear to me is that we actually have the chance, in our lifetimes, to make radical changes that will affect the next few thousand years of Earth history for all forms of life. There's an opportunity for urgent stewardship and responsibility here that you both highlight in the book. What might liberation theology say about the church's role in shepherding different forms of growth that are slower, less hasty, more in line with the pace of geologic change?
I like it.
A lot of big ideas in this one. Well, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that those concerns are the right concerns to have. There's we talk about a lot of the doom and gloom in the book because it's like good to ground yourself in reality, and that is all real. Like 14% of species there's a chance that 14% of species will go extinct at 1.5 degrees average of global warming. There's a chance of, like, I don't know, 29 to 30% of species going extinct at surpassing 3 degrees average of global warming. So, like, those are real concerns. Those are real things that are happening. And, I think a lot of the hope that green capitalism gives people is also, like, extremely unfounded. Like, you'll see, if you just, I don't know, scroll on Facebook as a good sort of progressive or lefty person, you'll see like image macros of stats about the uptake on renewable use and proliferation and price, and you'll think, oh well, maybe things aren't really as bad as you think, but they will neglect to tell you that all of that added renewable capacity to the grid is like, it's addition. It's not replacing. We're not replacing carbon based fuels, fossil fuels. We're like, adding capacity to the grid. So it's like it's great that we're adding it, but we're not subtracting any of the bad stuff yet. So all of this is like terrifying and bad. And it happens because of the pursuit of growth. I mean, like, growth and speed are two things that are that kind of go hand in hand, I think. Because not only does capitalism need growth to keep moving, but it needs like growth in a particular time period. In an economic corridor, it has to grow X amount, or else it is a failure, or it's not sustainable. So sustainable growth has to happen rapidly. But I mean, as Daniel is alluding to in his question, I think that degrowth is about something different. It's about slowing down. It's about consuming less. It's about producing less. It's about doing more with less energy, or finding ways to have less energy intensive processes where it is necessary. I mean, maybe that means like less virgin plastics in packaging, less stuff designed to be thrown away immediately, which would mean that you have to go to the shop with your big glass bottle to refill it full of Mountain Dew or whatever, rather than just getting an unrecyclable, like, virgin plastic bottle. I mean, I think that's exactly right, though. I mean, like, removing the conveniences of consumer society means that we have to live slower. That's what it means. It means that there will be conveniences that are lost, but also lots of culture and social connections made. So I think that is, inherently a part of the degrowth conversation.
Yeah, the degrowth kind of movement, such as it is. I mean, there's no there's no group of people out there where you're like, oh, and that's the degrowth movement. There's no spokesperson or whatever. But oftentimes you'll find a snail as kind of like an adopted mascot for degrowth. And I really like that. I guess that's an indication of the affinity here with exactly what Daniel was saying. And the thing about degrowth also is, like, I think the challenge of speeding up our society is one that none of us actually really enjoys anyway. And degrowth, I think, is trying to be like, why are we doing this thing we don't actually like? Nobody likes to live their life at like a breakneck pace. Nobody likes to be available at all times to their cell phone, whether for work or for, that weird family member who won't stop texting you. Like, nobody wants to be like in a situation where you're carried or you're like pulled along, everybody knows like there's not enough time for chilling out and reflecting, relaxing, and just like doing nothing, the right to be lazy, as Karl Marx's son-in-law put it. I think that's the difficult sort of task that we have in our own society. And like phenomenologically, we're all like, yeah, how do I slow down? Degrowth is trying to say, well, we've got to really plan our societies to make space to do that. And as Matt said, like, yeah, you shouldn't be able to get a package from Amazon delivered by a drone to your house like within hours, or next day delivery, or whatever crazy scheme is going on. Like, you can wait for your boots. I don't know what people are ordering. Like, I think it's just like, it's important to evaluate like what are the conditions we all want in order to live a life that feels connected to other human beings, that feels dependent on other human beings in a healthy way. So yeah, degrowth, it is also about slowing down. It is a pulling of the brakes. I think that can be scary for some people, especially for folks who, I don't know, maybe just feel attached to that kind of convenience, or like life is stressful. And so you kind of learn to rely on those strategies, but it does take the hard work of like, yeah, learning how to talk to your neighbors, and I don't know, making friends is as hard as it is to, as a person with social anxiety, to make friends. Like, I got to go do it. I need these people, and I think that's really an essential piece of degrowth, is to be like, how do we slow down in a healthy way? Yeah,
that's right. This is kind of a tangent, but I don't care. This isn't my podcast. So I'll do whatever I want, I guess. There's on the Magnificast lately, we've been revisiting a pretty weird and fringe Belgian anarchist writer named Raoul van Eyem, who is associated with the Situationists International.
R.I.P.
He's a weird guy, but very, very cool. I like him. Well, I have a love-hate relationship with him, I think, but I like what he writes, and I'm going to repeat it right now in this other podcast, so I must think something of it. He has a book called The Revolution of Everyday Life, which is really influential to the May 1968 movement in France. People were spray painting quotes on it from like on the wall, which is more than we can say about our book. So I don't know. But there's a bit in his book that he has where it's like part of his critique of capitalism is that it enables a type of like survivalist thinking above all else. At the bottom of everything within capitalist society, we're always trying to find a way to like just eke by a little bit more. And I think so much of our convenience is survivalist thinking. It's about like, how can I shave off a few more seconds of this so I can like just like take a breath from work or something, or distract myself to readjust myself from the awful day that I've just had, or whatever, right? And he ends up at the bottom of that type of critique is a critique of consumerism, that like we buy all of this stuff that we do not want, we do not need, that is not good for us or good for anybody. It's just sort of like there as a distraction, or it's there to just like kind of give us a little bit of something to get by. And in the end, he just says, who even wants all this shit? And I think that's the question that we need to be asking ourselves. Like, who does want all this shit that we have? It's too much stuff. We don't need any of it. We don't need boots the next day. That's a wild thing. And I think that people, this is, I mean, just anecdotally, just my own experience, but I think people are coming to see that a bit more, that like, I don't know, this is all kind of killing us. This is all too much. We don't really need all of this. I don't know. A very trendy thing now is getting a dumb phone. It's like finding ways to detach yourself and disconnect. And even that is like fraught with contradictions of being like, well, I have to buy one more thing to disconnect from capitalist life. But like, I think that, fundamentally we do want to be able to chill out a bit more. And capitalism is not going to get that for you. No matter how many dumb phones you buy or any other things that you do buy, capitalism will not help you chill out. The only thing that will help you do that is like chilling out. So maybe we should consider that a little bit more.
You're both reminding me of you quote Pope Francis as he calls for healthy sobriety.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful passage. You quote at length. He says, a constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing and each moment. To be serenely present to each reality, however small it may be, opens us to much greater horizons of understanding and personal fulfillment. That's like something that is totally endangered, The commodity fetishism logic is in how we scroll our phones, because we're hunting for the thing that will give us that that meaning. We can't be silent in a room. I'm speaking for myself. I'm always hunting for the thing that will allow it to be meaningful, which is a kind of growth logic. What can I add to this that will endow it with meaning? And that, takes us to the final brief chapter, which is life is worthless. And I'll just leave it at that is just such a wonderful way to finish the book, to kind of re-endow us with permission to stop thinking this way, to chill, to just be present, to notice the world without trying to add anything to it.
Yeah, it's very funny. My wife right now is away at a Buddhist monastery, and I cannot text her very often or talk to her very often because, wouldn't you believe it, it's not a good place to be on your phone. And she did text me the other day, and she was like, "You would love this place. It is everything you're saying in your book. You got to live in a monastery. They're doing degrowth out here. You can't look at your phone. You can't buy stuff from Amazon. You eat what you grow." It's like they're really living the utopia that you tried to explain in this like long, boring book that you wrote. She didn't say that. That's how I felt about it.
I mean, she's right.
Yeah, she's right. But I think there is something to that. Like there are spaces, and I think spiritual kinds of spaces are the ones who are at least one kind of way of preserving exactly that, like carving out some kind of meaningless time in an important way, like time to just stare at the wall and meditate, or a time to look at the cross and be like, yeah, what's going on there? Like, I'm going to take time to really figure out what did it mean for this person to make his life at the service of the oppressed people around him, at the cost of his own. I think that's, a hope of kind of reviving our Christian imagination. And I think it speaks to the deep time bit that Daniel's talking about here. Like, what is it about the immediacy of capitalism that removes us from the very history of the planet on which we live, the biological memory that has produced my own human body, all these kinds of things. There's a blog post by Leonardo Boff that we really wanted to work into the book, but didn't make it. And he says in it, it's a wild argument. He says there's good reason to be optimistic because in the end, the earth will defeat capitalism. But the question is whether or not human beings will be there to participate in it. And it's a really hard blog post to read because he's like, well, we tried our best. We tried socialism. Socialism couldn't really figure it out. Capitalism looks like it's kind of won. I mean, it's a bit fatalistic. But he says, but good news, the one thing capitalism can't do is destroy the planet. And the planet will actually destroy capitalism. And he says the last lines of it are, we should pray and prepare for the worst. And I think that's Boff at his most bummed out. There are other Boff moments where he's less bummed out and he's like, get out there and get it, all that kind of stuff. But I think there is actually a cause for optimism in a kind of potentially bleak spirituality like that, which is to say that capitalism is not total, that the world does exceed capitalism, and that we should find a way to ally with the earth as a thing that is finally going to defeat our own enemy, as complicit as we are with it. And I think that's the maybe deep time Christian spirituality that we can get if we slow down, to be like, there's a way longer horizon than the short blip that we're on. And at the end of that, capitalism won't be here. And hopefully there will be human beings there as well. But we've got to figure out how to set them up.
Well, Christ came and proclaimed that death will not have the last say.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Matt and Dean, thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us at such length. Can you just let people know where they can find you and tell them about your show, where they can find the book?
And make sure to mention the name of the book again, too.
Enough is Enough, Degrowth, Capitalism, and Liberation Theology by Matthew Bernico and Dean Detloff is the book.
That's right. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for engaging with us on it. It means a lot that people are doing that. Yeah, thanks. If you want, you can buy the book from Fortress Press. Please do that. Please buy this book. But if you don't want to buy it, our pitch has been to please ask your library to buy it. I think that's even better. Please do that. Libraries have money. They can buy this book for you, and then you can read it there, and then other people can read it too. We are not good salespeople. I work at the library,
so I'm going to request it.
Oh, hell yeah. All right. Yeah, we are not good salespeople. But if you want to buy it, you're welcome to do that. Ask your local bookstore to do it for you, or just order it from Fortress Press directly. That's fine. We are on Blue Sky at the Magnificast. You can find our podcast basically anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. I don't know. Dean and I are both individually on social media, but I don't know. You don't need to find me. Just find the podcast, I guess.
You should definitely find me. I need to grow my follower account.
Oh my God,
my one growth area. If you go to also tinyurl.com/enoughisenough book, it will take you to a landing page on our oft neglected website that does have some other resources there. There's a study guide if you want to read the book with your weird church group. There are a couple other interviews we've done there. There's also that parable that we talked about, the parable of the talents. We made a little zine that just cuts that bit out of the book. So if you're like, that's all I care about, I'm going to take that to my pastor and complain to him about his last sermon or whatever, that's the place to get it. You look at it digitally there. You can print it off, do whatever you want with it. But you'll find some more stuff there, and we're kind of updating it as things come out.
Awesome. Any last words, Jason?
No, I think just this is great, and I just agree. And I'm not going to keep that, by the way. I'm going to cut it out with the end of that page. not with me saying, right on.
Рабочие крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас. Без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, тянуть труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.